Coucou les amis, voici une vidéo pour vous donner une explication des verbes de ER. Il y a beaucoup de verbes de ER dans la langue française. Alors, pour conjuguer ces verbes, il y a une petite formule. So, first of all, I'd like to talk to you about des pronoms. En français, nous avons je, tu, il, elle, on, nous, vous, il, elle. Okay, so il and elle in the singular are the same pronunciation as il and elle in the plural. Okay, so you use context, and sometimes the conjugation of the verb that follows the pronoun in order to understand which group you're discussing. Okay. Next, I'm going to give you a small list of popular verbs that end in ER. We have parler, rencontrer, demander, aimer, adorer, acheter, manger. Now, acheter and manger do pretty much follow the formula for conjugating ER verbs, but there's a slight spelling difference for both of them. So keep that in mind, but for the most part, it's the same. So when we conjugate an ER verb, well, first, let's make sure we understand what an infinitive form of a verb is. So when you have the verb, for example, parler, in its infinitive form, it translates to talk. I like to talk. I like to talk on the phone. It's also to speak. I like to speak French. Okay, so whenever you in English would use the preposition to in front of our verb, that's the infinitive form. And in French, the infinitive form is unconjugated. So parler with the ER at the end is the infinitive form to speak or to talk. Rencontrer, to meet. Demander, to ask. Aimer, to like. Adorer, to love. Acheter, to buy. Manger, to eat. Now, if I want to say, I like to eat French fries, that means we have to conjugate the verb. So we change the spelling of the verb, and in many cases, the pronunciation as well. So the good news is that in French, there are three major groups of verbs. We have verbs that end in ER, like parler. We have verbs that end in IR, like choisir, which means to choose. And we have verbs that end in RE, like vendre, which means to sell. And these major groups of verbs are conjugated in the same way within each group. So in memorizing the formula, you provide yourself with a wealth of knowledge for how to communicate using these different verbs. There are, of course, a number of irregularly conjugated verbs as well, and we'll talk about some of those later. So here's the formula. To conjugate a verb that ends in RE, the first thing you do is drop the ER from the verb. I'm going to use parler, okay? So parler, we take off the ER, and to conjugate it for je, I, we add an E. Je parle. For you speak or you talk, we add an ES. Tu parles. As usual, we don't pronounce the S. For the il and the elle form, and there's also an on, and on means we also, or one. It's third person singular. You also add an E, just like je. So, il parle, elle parle, on parle. For example, on parle le français en France. One speaks French in France. Now, on the plural side, we have nous parlons. So we add an ONS. Nous parlons. Since I'm in Texas, I'll use the next one as the y'all form. So second person plural, vous. We add an EZ to the verb. Vous parlez. And then third person plural, il, elle, with the S. We add an ENT. So, il parle. Yes, the third person singular and third person plural sound exactly the same. So if I want to say he speaks French, il parle le français. It sounds exactly the same as if I'm saying they speak French. Il parle le français. So context is necessary in that case to understand who you are talking about. Now, just a quick word on, well, actually, let me take you through all of that one more time. Okay? So, je parle, tu parles, il parle, elle parle, nous parlons, vous parlez, il parle, elle parle. Okay. And a word about negation. Whenever you want to say doesn't or don't, we add two little words around the conjugated form of the verb. Okay, so I don't speak Spanish. So if I want to say I don't speak Spanish, I would say je ne parle pas l'espagnol. So you add the ne and the pas around the conjugated verb. Je ne parle pas espagnol. And often the ne is either kind of smushed up against the verb or it's left off completely in spoken French. You always add it when you write. You wouldn't leave that off, but you don't always hear it. That's just one of the idiosyncrasies of the spoken language. So you're speaking quickly, je parle pas espagnol. Okay, so you didn't really hear it there, but it needs to be there in writing. And you always include the pas, otherwise it's not negative. So, je ne parle pas l'espagnol. Nous ne parlons pas espagnol. Tu ne parles pas allemand. You don't speak German. Okay, so the ne and the pas go around the conjugated verb. Now, in many cases, you will have multiple verbs in a sentence. So luckily, we've got the verb aimer to illustrate with, which is an ER verb. Aimer is to like. And so here's an example of how you would use the infinitive form plus a conjugated verb in the same sentence. J'aime parler le français. So I've conjugated aimer because I like. Parler stays in the infinitive form just as you would do in English. J'aime parler le français. I like to speak French. Some people might not like to speak French. So how will we say that? I don't like to speak French. Think about that for a second. I don't like to speak French. Oh, I don't like to hear that. So you would conjugate aimer just like you do in English. Je ne, sorry, je n'aime pas parler le français. Je n'aime pas parler le français. I don't like to speak French. Okay. You going with what we've been talking about in class, being eating meat or not eating meat. Here's another example. Il, I'll use he just to change it up. Il n'aime pas manger la viande. Or maybe I'd like to ask a question. Do you like to eat meat? Tu aimes manger la viande? Tu aimes parler l'espagnol? Tu aimes jouer au volleyball? Do you like to play volleyball? Okay, so the aimer is conjugated. The other action verb is the infinitive form. Okay, so as a review, there are three major groups of regularly translated or conjugated verbs in the French language. We have verbs that end in er, like parler, manger, aimer, demander, rencontrer, acheter. We have ir verbs that end in ir, which we haven't talked about yet in class. Choisir, grandir, grossir. And then we have verbs that end in re, like vendre, entendre, comprendre. Okay, so lots of different verbs in all three categories. And once you memorize the formula for those three, you have a lot of useful verbs and phrases that you can communicate. Okay, so then you need to memorize the subject pronouns. Je, tu, il, elle, on, nous, vous, il, elle. And then for ER verbs, the first step is to drop the ER from the word and then add the appropriate ending. Je parle, tu parles, il or elle parle, nous parlons, vous parlez, il, elle parle. To make a verb negative, you put the ne and the pas around the conjugated verb. Je n'aime pas manger des plats riches. Est-ce que tu aimes manger la glace? Okay. Non, je n'aime pas la glace. Oh, quelle horreur. Okay, so the ne and pas go around the verb. And I think that wraps it up. Okay? Merci beaucoup.